An all-too-common problem returned to Texas this summer. In the past few weeks, we've had 2 mass shootings, adding to an already violent history. From the UT Tower, to Luby's, to Fort Hood, to Dallas, Sutherland Springs, Santa Fe, El Paso, and Odessa. It feels like something has changed this time. So much so that longtime Second Amendment advocate and powerful Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick announced he will break with the National Rifle Association and support adding background checks for some private gun sales. 10 Democratic candidates come to Houston to debate this week. I wanted to look at that landscape they'll walk into and what forces will push back. Truly, there are hard things politically and logistically to do, and then there's confronting the Second Amendment of the Constitution and redefining what it is to be an American for millions of people. There are more guns than people in America. Civilians own 393 million guns. But you find an interesting story when you dig deeper. According to the census, 50 million households have guns, so each gun-owning family has on average 8 of them. Some studies even go on to predict that just 3% of Americans own half of the guns in the entire country. We're going to get to why that's important a little bit later, but first it's important to understand that the people with guns are extremely vocal and politically active.
Armed civilians save lives, and so we believe Texas is safer and more lives are protected in Texas when we reduce the bans on carrying guns and get rid of the infringements.
The NRA and a coalition of smaller grassroots groups can mobilize powerful single-issue voters, people who vote on guns and guns only. Nearly all of the Democratic candidates in Houston this week will have similar policy ideas. Requiring background checks on all gun sales, red flag or extreme risk protection orders, banning high-capacity magazines, waiting periods for gun sales. But one Texan in the race goes farther than many other candidates. Former El Paso Congressman Beto O'Rourke.
And we should be honest with ourselves. Universal background checks will help. Ending the sales of weapons of war will help. But if millions of them remain on the streets, they will still be instruments of terror.
He wants to create a gun licensing system and a national registry, and he wants to make owning, selling, or making many semi-automatic rifles against the law. Then there is what many gun rights advocates hate the most, a mandatory buyback of millions of those rifles. So the government would give you money for your AR-15, AK-47, or M16, but you would have to give it to them or you'll be fined.
You don't need an AR-15, an AK-47. That is a weapon of war designed to kill people as efficiently, as effectively, in as great a number as possible.
Banning a certain type of gun runs right into the United States Constitution and the Supreme Court. So let's take a look at that. One of the most important decisions on the issue came in 2008 with District of Columbia versus Heller. DC's handgun ban violated an individual's right to have a gun. Here's Supreme Court Justice Scalia.
After examining many uses of keep arms and bear arms contemporaneous with and prior to the adoption of the Second Amendment, that it means pretty much what it means today, to have and carry weapons.
But then he said this in his opinion, laying out the limits based on an older case.
Miller's holding that the sorts of weapons protected are those, quote, in common use at the time, close quote.
Did you hear that? In common use at the time. Does common use refer to the number, the millions of AR-15s out there in America? Or are we talking about people? If 3% of the people own most of these weapons, are they really that common? This is one of the hardest political issues to work through, and we're not going to do it today. These Democrats are not going to do it in the debate. It's really up to the voters, the Constitution, and the courts.